Now, France is one of the world's leading exporters of weapons, the third largest, in fact. It supplies Rafale fighter jets, Navy ships, other weapons to Egypt, India and Saudi Arabia, to name just a few. Recent reports showed that French-made war machines had been used in the war in Yemen, a country where tens of thousands of civilians have been killed and millions more are on the brink of starvation. Anne Poiret spent 18 months investigating the French weapons industry and joins us now to give us her perspective. Ms. Poiret, your book, My Country Sells Weapons, paints a picture of a government, and not just the one currently in office, of governments here in France that lie to their citizens when it comes to the extent of the weapons industry in the country and who they're selling the weapons to. Firstly, as it came somewhat as a surprise to me, the not weapons factories, but the weapons towns that you describe in your book around France. Can you give us an idea of the extent of the weapons industry here in France and what it looks like?
It's quite big. It's actually the Ministry of for Armed Forces says there is 200,000 people employed, probably 400,000 indirect jobs. The ministry also says that there are 60,000 people direct job that is related to export on this industry. It's probably around 6 or 7 big industry, big companies, and several probably hundreds of companies, of small companies related to this industry.
Indeed, because you even described the way it's set up, outside Bordeaux. It seems like entire towns with training centres and some absurd situations where you have the weapons exporters and alongside them you have Doctors Without Borders. Quite a surreal geographical image in that book. But a big industry. That could be one question, of course, in itself. But one of the major concerns of the book is who these weapons are being sold to. And of course, with the affair of Jamal Khashoggi, and it came to light very recently with a media organisation you work with disclosed, France has denied it in the past, but there is proof that it sold weapons that have been used in Yemen.
Absolutely, there is a denial of denial of the French government of what they're selling exactly, and that's the big problem. It's a very regulated in France. It's forbidden to sell weapon abroad, and it's all controlled by a body, official state body, which is who decide every sale on every country. When there is might be a problem for any sale to a specific country, they will decide and they will, talk about it and discuss if it's appropriate to sell this weapon to such country. The problem is these discussions are classified. So as for the public, for the journalist, it's forbidden to understand why they are taken their decision. And that's the biggest problem. It's very not transparent.
No, a lot of the problem, it does seem to be the secrecy surrounding this industry. It seems to be a very close-knit collaboration between ministers, the military and the industry people themselves. But you have managed to glean quite a lot of information. And there is a certain line of defence that seems to come from the French governments, no matter what party even they're from. And that's France needs its defence system. It's the lesser of all evils.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. As you were mentioning, it's a lot of jobs. In most of the time, it's in area in France where there's not that much jobs, and it's they're needed, and it's very much needed industry in this kind of place. And there are good companies. They are hiring people, which is not such the case in France. So it's a very complex debate. But the problem is the details, as you were mentioning the fact that we are selling weapons, and this military notes that were leaked by disclosed media show that the weapons were sold and are used in the conflict in Yemen. And yeah, the problem is is the detail, and when you are trying to get the detail, then you get into trouble.
Because you quote various defence ministers, but France Parley saying, well, we didn't know when we sold weapons to Saudi Arabia. How could we know that the war in Yemen was going to erupt? They're basically saying, one, that they don't sell weapons, they sell planes, aircraft, not military equipment, and that also when they do sell to certain countries, they're not responsible for what happens.
Well, yeah, the problem is when you sell the weapon and at what time you are delivering them. And at the moment, it seems that they keep sending weapons to Saudi Arabia. Whether it's for contracts that were signed in the past year or not, or before 2015, we don't really know. But the thing is, we signed this treaty, the Arms Trade Treaty, that is forbidding to deliver actually the weapons when there is a risk of committing war crime with them. And that's what NGOs now states, that they say, you know, there is a risk, there is war crime committed in Saudi Arabia. This note that you mentioned, that was leaked by disclosed media, says that there are, in this document, you see there's this map with the 500,000 people at risk, as the military say, of being targeted by kind of this weapon. So the NGO says this treaty is forbidding. In this case, the treaty typically forbids a country to deliver the weapon. So what's going on?
France is just flaunting it blatantly?
Probably. We need explanation on that. We need the government telling the truth about exactly what's going on this story.
And I think until, you know, the Khashoggi affair, when people already started to question why France is selling perhaps so many weapons to Saudi Arabia, a lot of French people weren't aware of the size of, you know, the military structure in the country. Now that they are, how are people reacting?
I think there is a beginning of a debate. There is a very, maybe a shy debate, but there is a debate which was not existing before. It's very, very new in France. That's the main difference with our neighbor. There is also a lot of weapons being sold to Saudi Arabia in England, for instance, or even in the past in Germany. But there are debates there, and that's the main problem for me. It's like we need to have this debate, and we need the government telling the truth. You were mentioning the Khashoggi murder. It was a turning point here, clearly, because it's really show the nature of Saudi Arabia, this ally that the government was saying we had. And suddenly it was exposed, you know, and suddenly we start discussing this. What was striking at that time, on France 24, on France 24, the president, Emmanuel Macron, states that Saudi Arabia was not an important client in any field whatsoever for France, which is not the case, because the only thing that is public in France is reports to the parliament. That is crafted by the Ministry for Armed Forces, and it gives you the amounts of weapons that are delivered and that are for which you are given a license. So you have some figures, and this document, which is public, showed that Saudi Arabia for license is our first client actually. So it's really a problem when you have this government that is not telling the truth on such important story, and that's on a story that is so difficult to get information on.
Indeed, and also what becomes clear is that the sales of weapons in France seems to be going up, because often their defence is, well, you know, we're 5% of the global market, or less than 7%, while, you know, the United States is 50%, I believe that's the figure. But the sales do seem to have gone up under the previous government of François Hollande.
Absolutely. It was a decision, a political decision taken by François Hollande and organized and around Jean-Yves Le Drian, which used to be the Ministry of Defense and now is a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and he organized the sale of France, the sale of weapons, really to create a boom of exportation, specifically to sell the Rafale, first to Egypt and then Qatar and India. So it was a political decision. There is a global evolution. There is a global increase of weapon, and the weapon industry, is booming all over the world. But something happened in France during François Hollande's time.
And I guess perhaps the Arab Spring played into it, and then it goes on to also seeing, you know, in Libya, French weapons being used against French people then going in fighting Gaddafi's government. But you are also, of course, an investigative journalist, but you've been on the ground in war zones, and have you seen, you know, French weapons on the other side of the story?
No, you don't see the French weapon. I didn't say that, but I talked to a lot of people, civilians, not only the people in the armed force, in Libya, in Yemen before the war, and in Iraq, who say, why are you doing this? Why are you selling so much weapon to people who are clearly dangerous people, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, or the Saudi regime. You know, why are you this country that is on one hand selling so much weapon and on the other hand speaking about human rights, you know, and supposed to be the country of human rights. And civilians, they don't understand that in this country, and that's very troubling.
In those countries, and I think it's also been quite an eye-opener for a lot of people here in France. Anne Poiret, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us about the story and your new book out, My Country Sells Weapons. That brings us to the end of this edition of Perspective.